Last night, I went on live television and destroyed my father's life with a truth he buried 20 years ago. Why would a daughter do that? Because the week before, he looked at my child and said, "It's a shame she'll have to grow up without a mother." My name is Evelyn Prescott, and about an hour ago, I sat across from one of the most famous journalists in America and systematically dismantled my father's political career live on national television. The studio lights were hot, but I felt perfectly, unnervingly calm. The anchor, a man who had grilled presidents and world leaders, was momentarily speechless. He just stared at the authenticated documents I had provided: the land deeds, the secret bank transfers, the audio recordings. In the control room, producers were scrambling. Across the country, millions of people were watching the pristine, honorable image of Senator Sterling Prescott, a man they had trusted for 20 years, shatter in real time. He finally found his voice, his expression a mixture of professional shock and human curiosity. "Why?" he asked, the single word hanging in the air. "Why would you do this to your own father?" I leaned closer to my microphone, looked directly into the lens of the main camera, and spoke not to him, but to the millions of people watching. "They call this betrayal," I said, my voice steady and clear. But the real betrayal happened years ago, in a quiet kitchen, with a closed fist and a whispered threat. "This isn't revenge." I paused, letting the weight of the word settle. "This is simply reading the last will and testament of the truth." This is one of those dark, twisted family revenge stories people think only exist in fiction. It's the story of how a powerful political family declared war on their own daughter to protect a secret, and how that daughter decided to burn their kingdom to the ground using nothing but the truth. Have you ever been told to stay quiet, to not make waves, to swallow your pain for someone else's comfort? If you know that feeling, type the word louder in the comments below. Let's make our voices heard, together. To understand how we ended up here, under these blinding lights, you first need to see the cold, perfect world that came before it. Before the television studios and the legal battles, my world was a carefully curated portrait of Southern political royalty. We lived in a historic 3-story home south of Broad Street in Charleston, the kind with a sprawling veranda and ancient oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. Life wasn't measured in weeks or months, but in fundraising galas, polo matches, and Sunday church services where my father, Senator Sterling Prescott, would shake every hand, his charisma as potent as the low-country humidity. He was more than a politician. He was a local institution, a man whose reputation for unshakable integrity was the very foundation of his power. My husband, Mark, was his right-hand man, his handsome and ruthlessly ambitious chief of staff, the heir apparent to the Prescott political dynasty. And I, of course, was the perfect political wife and daughter. I hosted the flawless dinners, I chaired the right charities, and I smiled beautifully for the cameras. Our daughter Zoe often perched elegantly on my hip. We were the embodiment of family values, a walking, talking campaign poster for my father's re-election. On the surface, it was an American dream, dipped in sweet tea and privilege. But beneath the polished veneer, it was a performance. Every word I spoke was measured, every dress I wore was scrutinized, every public appearance a strategic move. My worth wasn't tied to who I was, but to the flawless image I helped project. I was a beautiful, smiling pillar holding up a fragile facade. Have you ever felt like you were living a life that looked perfect on the outside, but felt hollow and scripted on the inside? If you've ever had to play a role for your family instead of just being yourself, just type the word role in the comments. No explanation needed. I was so good at playing my part, so committed to the script, that I never imagined the moment I went off script, they wouldn't just be disappointed. They would try to erase me from the story completely. The perfect picture didn't just crack, it shattered. It happened on a rainy Tuesday in May, with my father's high-stakes re-election campaign in full swing. I came home from a charity luncheon earlier than expected and found Mark in our guest bedroom with a junior campaign staffer. The sheer cliché of it was almost comical. But the look on his face wasn't the shame of a husband caught betraying his wife. It was the cold, sharp panic of a political operative whose strategy had just been compromised. He wasn't worried about breaking my heart. He was worried I had just become a liability. That night, there was no tearful confrontation between a husband and wife. Instead, I was summoned to a crisis meeting in my father's home study. It was me, Mark, and Senator Sterling Prescott. They sat opposite me, not as family, but as a campaign committee managing a PR disaster. A divorce, right now, is simply out of the question. My father began, his voice leaving no room for debate. The opposition would have a field day. The family values candidate whose own family is imploding? It would destroy us in the polls. Mark then laid out their offer, his tone all business. Stay with me through the election in November, he said calmly. Play the part. Smile for the cameras. After we secure the win, we'll arrange a quiet, discreet divorce. You'll get a very, very generous settlement. You'll be set for life. They weren't trying to save our marriage. They were offering me a severance package for my silence. They saw my pain as a political variable to be managed. I looked at these two men I had dedicated my life to supporting, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I will not sell my life for your campaign. I want a divorce now. The atmosphere in the room turned instantly frigid. The pretense of negotiation evaporated. My father leaned forward, his charming public persona gone, replaced by something dark and unfamiliar. You need to reconsider, he said slowly. You will not be the one to jeopardize everything we've built. This problem will be handled one way or another. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a threat. I walked out of that study with my heart hammering against my ribs, but my resolve was like steel. The next morning, I did exactly what they had forbidden me to do. I scheduled a confidential consultation with the most formidable divorce attorney in Charleston, a woman famous for not backing down from powerful men. I wasn't just filing for divorce anymore. I was preparing for a battle, and I told her everything: the affair, the political pressure, the threats. My father found out within hours. His influence in this city is like a web. He feels every vibration. He showed up at my house that evening, alone. There was no pretense of a family chat. We stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my mother had taught me how to bake, and the air was thick with menace. I heard you met with an attorney, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I warned you, Evelyn. You are making a catastrophic mistake. The mistake. I shot back, my fear making me reckless. Was ever believing either of you were anything other than monsters. That's when I saw it. The mask of the charming, controlled senator didn't just slip, it disintegrated. He moved faster than I could have imagined. It wasn't a slap. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons, and slammed me back against the granite countertop. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and a dish crashed to the floor. You listen to me, he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with a rage I had never seen. This campaign is my life's work. Mark's career is tied to it. We will not be brought down by a scorned, hysterical daughter. You will drop this, or I will make sure you are so thoroughly discredited, so completely erased, that no one will ever listen to a word you say again. Do you understand me? He squeezed harder, and in his eyes, I saw the terrifying truth. He meant it. Have you ever seen a side of someone you love that you never knew existed? A side that left you truly terrified? If you've ever had a single moment that shattered your entire world, just leave a single period in the comments below. A silent nod for a moment that leaves you speechless. That night, listening to my daughter Zoe sleeping in her room, I finally understood. This was no longer about a marriage. This was about escaping a monster who wore my father's face. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the old house, every car that passed on the street below, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. His threat wasn't just the rambling of an angry man. It was a promise from a powerful one. At 3 a.m., under the cloak of a moonless Charleston sky, I woke Zoe. We're going on a little road trip, sweetie, I whispered, my voice shaking as I tried to sound cheerful. A surprise adventure. We packed 2 large suitcases with only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, her favorite stuffed elephant, my laptop, and a folder containing our birth certificates and passports. We left everything else behind: the furniture we'd picked out, the photos on the walls, the entire life I had so carefully constructed. By dawn, we were on Interstate 26, heading west with no destination, just a desperate need for distance. I soon discovered that my father's influence wasn't just political, it was an invisible cage built around the city. I tried to use our joint credit card to pay for gas, but it was declined. I called the bank, and they informed me the account had been frozen due to suspicious activity. A friend who had promised to help me find a lawyer suddenly stopped answering my calls. It was a systematic dismantling of my support system. He wasn't just pushing me out, he was strangling my resources, proving to me that he could, and would, erase me from the life I knew. I had just under $2,000 in cash from a personal savings account he didn't know about. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. I drove for 5 hours, not stopping until we crossed the state line into Georgia. Atlanta. It was a sprawling, anonymous metropolis, a place where the name Prescott didn't carry the same weight. As I paid in cash for a room at a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and worn-out carpets, I looked at my sleeping daughter in the passenger seat. We were fugitives. We had no home, no friends, and no plan beyond surviving the next 24 hours. The fear was a suffocating blanket, but underneath it, something else was beginning to stir, a cold, hard resolve. He had started this war. He just had no idea how brutally I was willing to fight it. Our first year in Atlanta was a masterclass in survival. I found a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was more grit than glamour. During the day, I was just another single mom, taking on remote freelance marketing projects, designing logos, and writing ad copy for small businesses across the country. I was earning just enough to keep the lights on and put food on our table. Zoe started first grade at the local public school, a world away from the manicured private academies of Charleston. To her, this was our new, quiet life. To me, it was a temporary, hidden base of operations. But my real work began each night after Zoe was asleep. The grief and fear that had consumed me on that long drive from Charleston had burned away, leaving behind a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I weaponized my marketing skills. I took online courses, not in brand strategy, but in open-source intelligence, digital forensics, and navigating the complex labyrinth of public records and campaign finance law. I learned how to trace money through shell corporations, how to find deleted web pages on the Internet Archive, how to be a digital ghost. My tiny second bedroom became a war room, its walls slowly covered in a spider web of names, dates, and connections related to my father's career. I wasn't just trying to rebuild my life. I was studying my enemy to find a weapon big enough to tear his world down. After a year of relentless digging, I found a name that kept appearing in old, buried articles about my father's first Senate race, Ben Carter. Carter had been a star investigative reporter for Charleston's leading newspaper until he got too close to a story about Senator Prescott's early campaign donors. Suddenly, a scandal erupted around him. He was discredited, fired, and effectively blacklisted from journalism. He was the first loose thread. I found him running a small, angry political blog from his home in rural Georgia. I sent him a message through an encrypted app. "You were right about Sterling Prescott. I'm his daughter, and I have the motivation to help you prove it." We met in a dingy diner halfway between our two cities. A disgraced journalist and an exiled daughter, forging an alliance over burnt coffee. The hunt had officially begun. For the next year, Ben and I operated like ghosts. We spent thousands of hours combing through decades of digital and physical archives, property records, city council meeting minutes, LLC filings, and campaign finance reports. It was a slow, agonizing search for a single crack in the fortress of my father's reputation. He was a master at covering his tracks, at creating a public record as pristine and charming as his public persona. There were weeks I felt hopeless, staring at spreadsheets until 3 a.m., wondering if he was truly as untouchable as he believed. The rage that had fueled me was beginning to cool into a dull, aching despair. The breakthrough didn't come from a spreadsheet. It came from a faded name Ben had scribbled in the margins of his old reporter's notebook. Liberty Point. Liberty Point was a small, historically Black neighborhood on the Charleston waterfront. In the early 2000s, the entire community homes, churches, local businesses had been bulldozed to make way for a gleaming luxury condominium development. The official story was urban renewal, a necessary step for the city's progress. The residents were forced out, paid a pittance for their ancestral homes under an eminent domain claim that had been aggressively pushed through by a then-state senator, Sterling Prescott. The developer who acquired the land for a fraction of its value? He was, and still is, my father's single biggest campaign donor. This was it. The original sin. But we still needed the smoking gun. We found it buried in the microfiche archives of a defunct local bank, a ledger showing a series of carefully structured payments from the developer's holding company to another shell company. It took us another month to unravel that shell company, but we eventually traced it back to the man who ran my father's first Senate campaign. It was a classic, illegal kickback scheme. And the final, sickening twist? When we cross-referenced the property deeds, we found the recent digital transfers that obscured the original sale had been authorized and executed by my ex-husband, Mark, as a digital modernization project for the campaign. He wasn't just my betrayer, he was the janitor for my father's oldest, dirtiest secrets. Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, a little thread you just couldn't stop pulling, even when it seemed hopeless? If you've ever trusted your intuition against all odds, just type gut feeling in the comments. We finally had it. Not just his crime against me, but a legacy of corruption built on the ruins of an entire community. We had our weapon. Having the evidence was one thing, wielding it against a man like my father was another. Senator Sterling Prescott was a master of media manipulation. He could kill a story with a single phone call, discredit a journalist with a well-placed whisper. Then, the old-school reporter wanted to take our findings to the New York Times. I told him no. We can't fight him on his turf, I argued. He'll see it coming and bury us. We need to create a new battlefield. My battlefield. This is where my years of marketing experience transformed from a career into a weapon. For the next 6 months, we didn't just collate evidence, we packaged it for consumption. We built the Prescott dossier, a secure, encrypted website that was a masterclass in information warfare. It wasn't just a data dump. It featured interactive timelines, infographics explaining the money trail, video testimonials from the few Liberty Point families we could find, and every single damning document, scanned and annotated. It was a story designed to be easily understood, instantly shareable, and utterly undeniable. It was our digital bomb. Then, we planned the attack. We wouldn't give the whole story to one big outlet. We would atomize it, creating a storm so widespread he couldn't possibly control the narrative. We gave the story of the displaced Liberty Point community to a respected social justice influencer with a massive online following. We leaked the technical data about the land deed cover-up to a tech journalist, famous for exposing digital corruption. We sent the evidence of the financial kickbacks to a small, fiercely independent political podcast known for its deep dive investigations. We were creating a dozen small fires simultaneously, all of them linking back to our anonymous dossier, all designed to ignite at once. We weren't just leaking a story, we were launching a campaign. The product was my father's downfall. And we were ready to go to market. We launched the attack on a Monday morning. The first spark was the social justice influencer's video essay about the Liberty Point displacement. It was powerful, emotional, and it went viral almost instantly, with the hashtag #PrescottPines, named after the luxury condos built on the stolen land. By noon, it was trending nationally. My father's press secretary issued a condescending denial, calling it a baseless smear from political opportunists. They thought it was just a small fire they could easily extinguish. Then, on Tuesday, the Deep Dive podcast episode dropped, methodically laying out the trail of financial kickbacks. On Wednesday, the Tech Journal published its piece on the digital cover-up, implicating Mark directly. It was exactly as we had planned, a multi-front war that made them scramble. They were playing whack-a-mole, issuing a denial for one story just as another, more damaging one erupted elsewhere. Each story, on its own, could perhaps be dismissed as a conspiracy. But together, with each one linking back to the mountain of receipts on our anonymous dossier website, they began to weave a narrative of corruption that was impossible for even his most ardent supporters to ignore. From my small apartment in Atlanta, I watched their world burn. I saw paparazzi photos of Mark, my once untouchable husband, looking haunted and exhausted, barking into his phone outside their campaign headquarters in Charleston. They were in a state of siege, and they had no idea the architect of their downfall was the woman they had deemed insignificant. They were hunting for a rival political operative or a foreign agent. It never occurred to them to look in the rearview mirror. There is a unique, quiet power and patience in playing the long game while your opponent celebrates a victory they haven't truly earned. If you know what it's like to bide your time, waiting for the perfect moment to make your move, do me a favor and hit that like button. A little signal for all the strategists out there. The smaller outlets had done their job. The story was now too big, too verified to be contained. The national news networks began circling like sharks. And they weren't calling my father's office for a comment anymore. They were calling Ben Carter for an exclusive. It was time to light the final fuse. Ben Carter negotiated the terms. One network, one exclusive interview, live, with no topics off limits. The night of the broadcast, I sat in the green room, my reflection in the mirror almost a stranger to me. I wasn't the terrified woman who had fled Charleston with 2 suitcases and a bleeding temple. I was a soldier, and this was the final offensive. A producer clipped a small microphone to my dress. "Are you ready, Miss Prescott?" she asked. I took a deep breath and nodded. I was born ready for this moment. I just didn't know it until they forced my hand. I walked onto the set. The lights were blinding. The anchor began, as I knew he would, with the personal angle, the messy divorce, the rumors of family strife. I answered his questions calmly, factually, refusing to be cast as the hysterical, scorned woman they had tried to paint me as. Then, I took control. "But this story has never been just about my personal pain," I said, looking directly into the main camera. "It's about a pattern of corruption and abuse of power that has been a part of my father's career from the very beginning." That was the pivot. I walked the national audience through the Liberty Point land grab. When the anchor brought up the senator's denials, I was prepared. "My father is an expert at denying the truth," I said. "So let's not use my words. Let's use his." I nodded to the control room. They played the audio file, a secret recording Ben had uncovered of a phone call between my father and his campaign manager 20 years ago, laughing about how they had cleared out that slum for a steal. The anchor's jaw hung open. I then held up a copy of the bank ledger, pointing to the camera to show the direct flow of money from the developer to the campaign's shell company. And for the final, devastating blow, I presented the server logs, with timestamps and IP addresses, proving my ex-husband, Mark, had personally accessed and digitally buried these exact files just 2 years ago. There was no spin. There was no denial. There was only the cold, hard, irrefutable evidence, broadcast into millions of homes. The cameras went dark. In the sudden, ringing silence of the studio, I knew. It was over. The fallout was immediate, total, and catastrophic. By the next morning, my face was on every news channel and the front page of every major newspaper. The narrative wasn't "Senator's daughter makes wild accusations." The headline in the Washington Post read, "Senator Prescott to resign amid corruption scandal following daughter's bombshell interview." The evidence I presented was too thorough, too documented to be spun or dismissed. It was a kill shot. Before noon that day, my father, facing immense pressure from his party and an imminent ethics investigation, announced his immediate resignation from the United States Senate. The political dynasty he had spent a lifetime building was annihilated in less than 24 hours. My ex-husband, Mark, was fired from his lucrative new lobbying job. The Department of Justice swiftly announced a federal investigation into his role in the digital cover-up and the illegal campaign finance activities surrounding the Liberty Point deal. Their carefully constructed world of power and impunity had crumbled to dust. And what did I get from all this? I didn't get a financial windfall. I never received an apology, not a real one, at least. I got something far more precious. I got my name back. I got my credibility. I got the truth. In an emergency court hearing, a judge granted me a revised divorce settlement that awarded me full, sole, and uncontested custody of Zoe, terminating my father's grandparental visitation rights, citing the clear evidence of his violence and coercive control. I got my daughter's safety. I got our freedom. But I knew my story couldn't end there. A month later, I used my new, unexpected platform to launch the Truth to Power Foundation, a nonprofit that provides legal aid and resources to victims of domestic and political abuse who are trying to speak out against powerful figures. I took the ugliest chapter of my life and turned it into a shield for others. I wasn't Senator Prescott's daughter anymore. I was just Evelyn, and for the first time, that felt like more than enough. So that's my story. The story of how I lost the family I was born into, so I could protect the family I am building with my daughter. There are days when I mourn the father I thought I had, the comfortable life we once knew. Justice isn't always a clean, satisfying victory. Sometimes it's a necessary amputation. It's the bitter, painful medicine required to cure a poison that has run through a family for generations, ensuring it stops with you. The price of truth can be devastatingly high, but the cost of silence is always higher. And if there is one lesson, one single piece of hard-won wisdom I can leave with you, it is this. Your voice has power, especially when powerful people desperately want you to believe it doesn't rebross creeple. Trust your intuition. Document everything. And understand that sometimes, the most courageous act of love is not to forgive unconditionally, but to hold people accountable for the harm they cause, regardless of the blood you share. You have the right to draw a line in the sand and say, your control ends here. My safety, my child's safety, my truth, these things begin here. True family doesn't demand your silence. It helps you find your voice. My revenge wasn't just about tearing down a corrupt legacy. It was about building a new one for my daughter, founded on the one thing they couldn't take from me, the truth. If this story, in any way, speaks to a battle you are facing, whether it's big or small, then I hope you'll subscribe and join this community of people who refuse to be silenced. And for my final thought, I want you to leave a comment below and tell me one truth you are proud to stand for in your own life. Let's fill this space with our collective strength. Thank you for listening. Remember, you do not need anyone's permission to reclaim your story.